And then for all that don't know me, I'm Colonel Tom von Eschenbach, the current TICM UAS at Fort Rucker. I've been in the job for about, I'd say, 6 to 8 months now. But what I was told when I was asked to moderate this panel, I had this vision of I would be sitting there like a nice moderator and have a great cast of colonels or generals to help me answer some of the questions. And I got told, hey, they're not going to be up there as part of the panel. They're going to be out in the crowd to help you. So I have a great esteemed crowd of guys here. I'll point out a few of them. Colonel Tim Baxter's there. He is the PM UAS, is my counterpart at Huntsville. His deputy, who you guys probably were at the opening ceremony this morning, Rich Crutchmeyer, is here. Him and I went to Auburn together. He's a lot smarter than I, so you see I ended up in the Army. He's Civilian of the Year, so you see the difference there between the two of us. A couple other guys. Colonel Paul Bontrager was the commander of 101 CAB when they first, in the Army, first started talking about manned-unmanned teaming with Shadows and Chi Warriors. Colonel John Evans, who I've met when I was a brand new second lieutenant in the 82nd. I knew he was destined for great things when I first saw him. He is the commander of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. They currently have a Gray Eagle company in the fielding process, and he's got some things to possibly say there. Colonel Tom Drew, current commander of 101 CAB, who is continued to have really the only aviation brigade right now that has Shadows in its formation. You know, maybe some questions about training of UAS inside an aviation formation. Colonel Drew just recently went through a BCTP, MCTP rotation where they played Gray Eagle for the first time, so maybe some conceptual things about how we're incorporating Gray Eagle in our formation. And then as I see faces in the crowd, one guy, John Klein, said he wouldn't answer any questions, but Colonel John Klein is the commander of 3rd CAB. Was really what I would consider, you know, the first aviation brigade in the way we fielded Gray Eagle to actually get the capability fielded at his location as a commander who took ownership of a lot of the responsibility to train that formation as they get ready to deploy. Steve Seitz is here in the crowd. I asked him at the last second to come in. He is Fort Rucker's Director of Simulations. As you might have heard General Lundy's comments about how we're going to leverage simulation and how we train, he'll be able to maybe cast some light on some of those questions. So I'll open up with the first, at least my perspective as the TICM of what I've seen in the last, I would say, 6 to 8 months. As it's new to me. I'm a Chi Warrior guy by trade. I was the commander of 317 CAV as a task force in Afghanistan. Spent time with the 82nd CAV in Iraq. And so I will tell you this. Before I took the job, I got told, hey, you're going to go up to Huntsville, get sequestered for 2 weeks, and participate in this thing we're calling the Aviation Restructure Initiative Plan. Little did I know what it would kind of spin out to be, but as a Chi Warrior guy, and now the TICM UAS, I will tell you the ARI is absolutely the right thing to do. And I think what I would like to say is our narrative gets lost in what ARI did for UAS. In one, we want to talk about the Apaches and the fight between the active and reserve component. We want to argue about, does LUH the right training helicopter? We want to talk about the divestiture of a Chi Warrior, which has done great things for our Army in its time, but it's time to move on. What's lost is really, I think, the most key and critical component of Aviation Restructure Initiative, which is what kept all of our Shadows. So we had 102 systems that were in all the BCTs, and in that drawdown, we're going to take every one of those systems and reinvest it back into our aviation formations. ARI also paid for a lot of the unfunded requirements that we had previously to ARI in the 1620 POM that got the TCDL upgrade for every one of the systems, and it bought back a lot of the capabilities that we weren't going to get for Shadow. And then really what I would tell you from an aviator's perspective, the greatness about that is we now have a structure, a heavy ARS, that has a Shadow platoon assigned to every Apache troop, ARS troop, in the active component. And I will tell you that's the beauty in the ARI, because guys like us that have learned to fight over the past 20 years, it's great that we have a a wealth of our experiences that we use to command formations. But the true guys that innovate, the guys that are out there figuring out how to do things better and to having new TTPs to do it, are the young captains that are out there that don't have those previous experiences to prejudice them. So we're going to hand them a great capability, and now we're going to let them figure out how to use it. And I will tell you, that's probably the thing about ARI that is the best of the whole plan. And you can dissect the plan at one by one and say, hey, you know, this is bad. But when you look at it holistically, when it's in its whole, ARI does a lot of great stuff. So a couple things we're doing at Fort Rucker, and then I'll kind of open it up for questions. And if you heard General Lundy speak, he got to it. And General Lundy is a consummate trainer. He's a guy who has spent his life at the CTCs. He's came from CACT at Leavenworth about training. And a comment that was made, you know, kind of in this budget-constrained environment is as the TICMs, you know, we need to start focusing less on the material solution and let the PM, you know, handle his business, and really in a fiscally constrained environment, and a material solution to bridge a gap just really isn't in the realm of possible anymore. So let's start focusing on our doctrine, our training, our leadership, you know, our facilities, because the material solution is really, over the past 10 years, has gotten ahead of all the other things in the dot mode that needs to catch up now. So, you know, we're looking at, for instance, as he said, when we field shadows to the heavy IRS, what training do we need to do for that formation to ensure that they not only know how to employ it, but how is it maintained, how those guys mentored, and then how do we move forward through, a lot of times through simulation and stuff, to how to get at those training gaps. So I'll kind of finish my opening comments on that. I don't know if the panel guys had any things to say if they wanted to come up. Well, they'll have an opportunity if you have any questions specifically, but I'll go ahead and open it up. I'll field a couple questions, and then we'll go from there. So does anybody have any comments or questions about MUM-T? I know a few were asked of General Lundy, and I can expand on that one, but I'll open the floor. Nothing? Okay, in the back? Ed Vedder doesn't want to ask a question. You just stand up and leave him. Hey, could you guys turn it? Did you turn it down a little bit? Turn it back up? All right. All right, so here's, okay, I'll go through a few of the programmatics you guys might want to hear about than what we're doing. So currently, the Shadow version 2 is in FOT&E at NIE 14.2. So we'll run the test through probably about the 20th of May. After that's complete, you know, when we get to the material release, we will start fielding shadows to the aviation formations and the V2 formation probably around January of 15. And we'll run that through both the cabs. We'll get the BCTs that already have shadows, their version 2, and then we'll continue to field them until complete. And then we'll have essentially what will be as a shadow platoon in every BCT as it still exists now. We'll have 3 platoons in every cab. And then we'll have, obviously, the Ranger Regiment and the SF groups will have shadows. And we'll keep about 102 systems in the Army. There'll be still, shadows will still be in the National Guard in the BCTs, but not in the aviation. Gray Eagle, we're currently still fielding Gray Eagle. I would say we're probably about halfway through the fielding process. Our material purchases are coming to a close, but third cab was just completed. Colonel Evans' 160th company is at Fort Huachuca now, still going to training, and they will replace the QRCs that are deployed now. 10th cab up at Fort Drum is next in line. Then we'll field the capability to the NTC, where we're going to have what we consider to be like a manned-unmanned teaming capability. They'll be at the NTC, and then we'll continue to field. And then towards the end, the INSCOM formations, the AEBs, will get their Gray Eagles to support, you know, the ISR mission there that will replace the Hunter, and that'll probably run through FY 18-19. So by about 18-19, I think we've completed those 2 fieldings, and then really what we'll be focusing on from there on out is ensuring that our TTPs and our training and doctrine is right, and then any probably additional sensors or things that we need to do to support that are done. All right, so with that, you guys don't look like a very question kind of crowd. You're in the receive mode, aren't you? So there was, I guess you guys came in here for either one of three things. You like came in to see me, which is probably like 2 people. You came in because you were told, because it's like 5 people, and the rest of you came in to write down what I was going to say, right? So Eric, so go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. It's a question about the level of interaction between the UAVs and the helicopters. We have the capability to take control of the UAVs at different levels. And as a Tiger pilot, I know that we are very busy as a pilot in command, by night, top of the earth, very close to the obstacle. What is for you the best level of interaction we can deal from inside an attack helicopter, taking the control of one UAV?
Okay, so if thank you, Eric, appreciate it. So the question was, I'll just repeat it real fast, and then maybe I'll ask either Tom Drew or Paul Bontrager to answer that because of their experiences. So the question, and it's a very good question, it's common to the formation, is what level of control is appropriate for a helicopter pilot who already is task saturated maybe with the control of his system, and what's appropriate because now he is taking over a level of control of a UAS. So if, you know, in the levels of control, the numbers, so like level of control 2 is he has direct receipt of the sensor payload, so he sees it, or she. If level 3 is you can see it, and then you can control the payload and steer it. And then 4, you actually can move the flight of the UAS around and choose that. And then 5, which is we're not really talking about, which you can actually land it. So from either one of you guys' experiences, maybe you can talk about some of the things there.
I can speak to that. Paul Bontrager, if I haven't met you yet. This time last year, I was still downrange with 101st Cab, and we were doing manned-unmanned teaming with 58s, as well as with Apaches. And I absolutely have never felt comfortable with the pilots having the additional workload of having to fly the UAS. But as you look at how things are developed, they're developed, and sometimes the human capacity to keep up just isn't today what it might be 2 or 3 years from now. 10, 15 years ago, our pilot saturation, our workload was taken up with navigation. How much effort do we put in navigation right now? Not that much. So I can see in the future where we have that capability, it might actually be more helpful. But as of right now, the last thing I would want would be a rotary wing pilot in a combat scenario trying to also fly a UAS. That being said, last year, and every squadron that's deployed in the last, I would say, 7 or 8 years has done a version of manned-unmanned teaming, all with remarkable success for the equipment they had and the environment that they had. But the other thing that we found out was it's really not necessary. Those UAS operators, when they are part of the training plan, when they're part of the mission planning and the mission brief, they know what they're doing. They have the intuitive capability of keeping up with the mission that a manned scout aircraft has when they're up there. Matter of fact, when you're up there, I don't care if you're doing a security mission or reconnaissance mission, they will, if they have the clear commander's intent, the reconnaissance objectives, and the priority of effort, they will be beating the manned aircraft, beating as in intellectually ahead of the battle, because, again, they're not chasing every shiny object. They're just doing their specific task. So in my recent experience, it hasn't been a need for that because the UAS operator is as capable of keeping that payload where it needs to be oriented as a manned sensor. And in fact, in a lot of ways, they're better at it because it's like that. You know, we used to bemoan the UAS because of the soda straw. All you see is a soda straw. You can't see everything else. Hey, that ends up being a strength of the system because you're not distracted by every shiny object that you have in your 240-degree field of view. So you do stay a little bit focused, and you can find things that a manned system often misses. So I hope that answers your question. I'm going to continue for 1 second here as I have a retrospect of our of our deployment, some things that I wish we had done differently. And it comes to what Tom was talking about earlier. We got manned with our shadows about a year before we went downrange. So we went downrange. We were pretty good man-unmanned, teaming with our shadows, with both 58s and with Apaches. But when we got downrange, we fell in on a Gray Eagle company of which we had done exactly zero preparation. Hadn't trained with them, hadn't really even talked about it. A little bit, but we hadn't talked about it. But the important thing, above all else that we hadn't done, is we hadn't cracked the books. We hadn't looked into the doctrine of employing a Gray Eagle company. So talk about having to play catch-up. So the other thing that you have to be cautious of is by the time we got there, it was the Gray Eagle company out of 1st Cav Division. It had already been sucked up by division, where the Division G2 had tasking authority over all those lines from that Gray Eagle company, and the cab was, for the most part, wasn't even part of the equation. So we get down there, and we no kidding looked up the manuals and pulled it out, and right there in Chapter 1 it says how the cab is supposed to be the proponent for this. The cab S3 is the one that tasked those assets based on the division need, and it was complete. We had to wrestle control of a few lines back from the division. Now, we were successful, especially when General McConville and the 101st rolled in there. We were able to get some lines back. But like Tom said, it starts with the doctrinal understanding. The cabs have to own the RISTA mission. This is a RISTA asset. This is not an MI asset that we're talking about here. Own the RISTA asset, train with them, and know the doctrine, and then deploy in a manner that you are truly the one employing those assets. So that's a big thing right there. I'll turn it back over. Or questions?
Well, all right. I won't speak for Colonel Bontrager, but I would say this. Here's what I would tell you: if we would have made the move to put Apaches into our Cav squadrons, you would have still seen shadows. And we just didn't have the ability because of the numbers to make the manned-unmanned teaming in the Cav squadron. So that was he had proved that out in his deployment, that it was a additive thing to the Cav squadron to team a unmanned system with a manned system. And I think the narrative in the discussion is lost is that the Shadow does not replace a COL warrior. The Shadow is an additive, or an unmanned system is an additive capability to a manned system that gives it the commander the choice to have some additional reach. He can weigh the risk-reward spectrum of where he wants to do it. He has persistence in that the system is out there longer. And then you could then flex your muscle, the manned, killer, to the right place at the right time. I mean, and I was going to say this in this MUM-T deep dive group. Manned-unmanned teaming has been around for quite a while. The hunter-killer concept has been around since Vietnam, right? So in Task Force Odin, we first started discussing how to do this. That was manned-unmanned teaming. So you have really probably a couple events happen as technology now allows us to do it differently. We had an event called, sequestration and ARI that caused us to have the ability to make this decision to do this. And now we're starting to say, look at all the goodness and now what I said about the captains, the TTPs now can change. The mission's the same. The doctrinal task and purpose doesn't change. But now we're figuring out different ways to do it. And kind of, so most guys like the Kiowa guys will say, I'm being replaced by a Shadow. That's absolutely not true. You're being replaced by an Apache. Well, and we're adding a Shadow there to increase the capability of that formation because, and I don't want to get off on the merits of a COL warrior, but those of us that have flown them will tell you in the last 10 years of conflict, the COL warrior was successful despite of the platform. It was the aviators inside that platform who had the attitude to go do it. But you know what? The enemy let us get that close. And a site that wasn't that great, that couldn't really fight well in the terrain of Afghanistan, and a non-articulated rocket pod with a fixed machine gun, we were allowed to get that close to be effective. In a near peer, something that's going to reach out and touch us, I would tell you the Kai Warrior guys would never be able to do what they did in 2 conflicts and get that kind of like, hey, we are apart. So, and that's why you'll hear the narrative a little bit is the the Apache plus the Shadow fills a piece of the armed aerial scout requirement, although in the AOA it was not affordable. Well, now we have the opportunity, based off of a smaller force, to do that. The AAS requirement still exists, but I will tell you it's much better. I would take this formation 10 times over than a salami slice 10 cab set with an Apache ARB and a Kai Warrior Shadow teamed Cav squadron. So, not to get off on the ARI discussion, but that's the point. So, go ahead, sir, in the back. Okay, so if I understood you correctly, you were asking, and here's another thing. Manned-unmanned teaming just isn't a Shadow and an Apache. Manned-unmanned teaming really includes ground systems. So, yes, you have really a couple things that we're doing. So we have Gray Eagle and Apache, the capability for the A64E and the Gray Eagle for LOI-4 control and the teaming there. You have Apache and Shadow, which, now talking a little bit different systems and capabilities, but you have capabilities and things, both material solutions and training that we need to do for that. And then you have, the distribution of that sensor data down to the OSR, VT, rover, those kind of things of how to do that. And I guess, to give a plug for simulation, as we plug the Universal Mission Simulator, which will be fielded for the Gray Eagle and the Shadow, connect it to the LCT, which is the Apache simulator, and then attach those simulations to our AVCAT and the other ground simulation systems. So now you're really teaching people how to use the feeds and the doctrine and all the other TTPs that go along with that. So we've had like 2 NTC rotations under our belt with Gray Eagle there. Obviously, the first couple ones, you're learning a lot. That's why we do those things. What's the better? Is it a bidirectional? Is it omnidirectional? What's the range? And we're learning a lot of those lessons to include where do we put our GCSs to make sure that they're connected back there and feeding the sensor data to the right person, the right place, the right time. So I hope did I answer your question? Okay. Yes, sir. Okay, I'll go backwards then. So currently the UAVs are not tethered to a helicopter. That's not a capability that when you say of tethering, that would be kind of like, no. So autonomously that UAS tethers to whatever that aircraft does. We don't currently do that. So like Colonel Bontrager said, our UAS formations are centered around the Universal Ground Control Station. So the Shadows are a little bit different, but the vision in the future would be to have that ground control station, whether it's a Shadow UGCS or Gray Eagle, to control either or of the UAS. So those are the soldiers that are part of those Shadow platoons or Gray Eagle companies that have the primary responsibility to execute the mission of the UAS. And then what you have is a capability, once fielded, of our manned platforms to take control of the UAS depending on that level of, so in theory, as the doctrine would be, the UAS operator executes the mission. If it's teamed up with a manned system, the pilot could at some point in time take the payload, shift it to see he wants to look around over here or here, and then if he wants to dictate the orbit and the flight path, he could. But that's not. I wouldn't say that's not the starting point. That would be a vignette or a branch to the plan. So our system is, and I'm assuming maybe everybody knows this, Army UAS have operators. They're enlisted soldiers. They're not pilots, but they're trained to operate a UAS, where I think our Air Force model, they still have kind of the stick and rudder rated aviators flying their system. So it's a little bit different how we incorporate ours. Did I answer your question?
So the pilot could take control.
He could, but he's not. The mission isn't designed for him to do that all the time.
Because it would be information overload for him.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that's because. It's because we have qualified UAS professionals. That's their mission, to be at the ground control station to fly those missions. Yes, sir.
So, Charlie Martin from Australia. Based on what I was hearing before, the level of interoperability that they're seeking at the user level is LOI 2 to LOI 3. So what is driving LOI 4 capability for the Echo Apache?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. Rich, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'm Rich Kretschmar, Deputy PM for UAS. So I'm not going to answer that exactly, what's driving the LOI 4, because that's Colonel von Eschenbach's lane. But I wanted to clarify something. When we say level of interoperability 4 and the ability to control the aircraft, what we're really doing is pointing the payload in a certain direction, and the aircraft has the algorithms to follow that payload within a certain volume. We call it SAVKIA, Safe Air Volume, Keep in Algorithm. So the pilot in any CONOP is not going to be sitting there flying the aircraft like he would from a GCS. They don't have that capability in the cockpit to do that. But they do have a little bit more flexibility in controlling where the payload's going to go within the SAVKIA volume. So I just wanted to clarify what LOI 4 means.
All right, and I'll maybe defer to one of these guys up here who has them in their formation. But maybe to answer your question, I would only say that, at the tactical point in that decision-making process for that air mission commander to say, instead of relaying back to the ground control station operator that he wants the UAS to do X, Y, Z, he can then take control, put it into orbit, deconflict, and then make that kind of dynamic retasking. I don't know if you guys, Tom, in your shadow experience, have you seen integration with the manned-unmanned teaming or planning or?
Yeah, currently in our CAV squadron, my F troop, these are CAV troopers that just happen to be flying UASs. And I think that's the difference. I don't need to have them controlling the sensors, because those crews, they just happen to be remotely piloted, but they're CAV squadron troopers, and they're doing their mission. So I really don't need them doing that kind of thing. And I don't have that current capability, obviously, with the Shadow. But really it comes down to, how do you inculcate that reconnaissance and security mindset and understanding the commander's intent and executing just like you would if you had a Kiowa, an Apache, whatever platform you're in. To me, and the reason, Paul did just a phenomenal job with integrating the shadows in there. When you go down to my CAV squadron, you cannot tell which ones are pilots of manned aircraft and which ones are pilots of our shadows. They're all wearing Stetsons, they're all on one team, and they all have the same mission. And I think that's the thing that takes us forward with this manned-unmanned teaming. And not only getting used to how each other operates, but that mission, intent, and that focus. So that's kind of how we do it there, and Paul was the guy that developed that.
And I guess, the one thing I've been meaning to say at the beginning, and I guess, this MUM-T is a buzzword. You know how it gets when you hear, and everybody thinks it's a certain definition, but it really isn't. But I will just say this, MUM-T, it's not a pickup game, right? It's not like something you just go out and do. It's I think would be, the capability of a collective, training level that the guys know how to go out and do. And I'd only use maybe what we used to call AGI, right? In pre-Afghanistan, Iraq, our training ability to go out and fly over a ground formation and to just get on the radio and start clicking like that with those ground guys was not like it is today. And we've gotten to the point where AGI is not even used anymore. We don't really talk about it because it's so intuitive to the relationship of the ground force to the aviation. So now we have, UAS is new and it's exciting, and we have this MUM-T buzzword. what I think is what we're talking about is that now we have to get it at collective training level between a manned and unmanned system. And once that's, 10 years from now, hopefully we won't be talking about MUMT. It'll just be an assumed aviation operation, TTP, and it'll kind of be, we might still call it MUMT, but it'll be how aviation operations is executed. So I guess, kind of on that lines. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let me add to that real quick, because that was the other main point that I thought should be brought up today. What Tom's talking about of how you get this complex mission task where you have a unmanned system working with a manned system, working with somebody on the ground. It's doable. We do things like that sometimes, but what makes it difficult is everything, the .mil PF problem with UAS. And the primary issue with that is the training environment for UAS is just, for the most part, unsupported across America. Everything from airspace to concerns over built-up areas, you name it. It is just many places, and I'm up at JBLM right now, Fort Lewis. It is just so hard to do up there. Guess what we don't do? We don't do it. Okay, so now you take a task that requires, it's a complex task that requires a lot of effort, and if you don't do it, if it's not easy to do, you're never going to get where you need to be. So what this puts us in a situation is we have to figure out a way moving forward to get the number of repetitions we need to get really good at manned-unmanned teaming of these three elements: ground, air-manned, air-unmanned. The only way I see forward, because we got to be impatient with this. If we think that the FAA or anyone else is going to move fast enough that we're going to be okay, it's just not going to happen. Now take this problem overseas. Take it to ICAO flight rules. Take it to any place in the world, and now try and get that done. It's just not going to happen. The only path I see forward is through simulation. We have to have a simulation process and system out there that enables us to get hundreds and thousands of repetitions in of this very complex thing, where the ground guys are right there with us, with the unmanned, with the manned platforms. If anyone has a better idea of how to move forward, I think the enterprise would love to hear it, but I just don't have any idea what it is.
No, thanks for that. So, and I'll add to that. So when I talked about the DOTML, one of the things, if you guys know, it's a doctrine, organization, training, material, and those things. And so the one thing that we normally don't really talk about is facilities. And so now I visited Fort Bragg a couple of weeks ago, and went to talk to their shadow guys to see how they're doing business. And it's really hard right now because they fly in and out of one strip, and it's usually taken up by other units. And so in ARI, we're going to put 3 shadow platoons in the 82nd Cab. We'll have the 3 BCTs, and then we're going to have an SF group. So you'll have 7 shadow platoons all fighting for the same little piece, dirt strip out there at R5311. And so we need to get beyond that old model of how we train, and not only to get these guys the opportunity to train, but he talks about the simulation, is that, the connected, and really it's not, there was some discussion about LOI-4. Well, really a UAS operator, as I said, is not flying the system. He's clicking on a map to tell the system to go here and here. So the actual stick and rudder, seat of the pants flying is not the training event. It's talking on the radio. It's relaying information. It's making mission command type of decisions on when to do stuff and positions of aircraft and when to shoot. So, and that can be done through simulation. I'm not sitting here advocating that we can accomplish all our training objectives, but if we don't interconnect all of them, then I think we're doing the wrong things, though. And I don't know, Steve, did you want to add in some of the initiatives we're taking on Sims?
We have approximately 90 UAS simulators across the Army right now. At Fort Rucker, we have sort of a prototype for the UMS, which we've done some experimentation with to link it up with AVCAT, which we've done successfully. But there's approximately 100 more of the Universal Mission Simulators going to be fielded across the Army in both the Gray Eagle and Shadow configurations. Also, right now, if you're not aware, our Longbow crew trainers are going back to the factory for reconfiguration and coming out as E-models. And as part of that, they have a new operator workstation which includes a MUM-T capability that the operator can use to train the pilots. Now, that's not designed to train the UAS operators themselves, but to train the crews. So if you use that to do your basic crew training, and then starting in FY15, your AVCATs will have the capability to actually integrate your collective training with multiple aircraft, and hopefully link your UAS in, sorry, Universal Mission Simulator, UMS, so that the operators can get training as well. So back to that unit concept, now you'll be able to train your entire unit, your UAS operators and your aviators as a collective force to do this, to do MUM-T training. And obviously all the airspace restrictions that were out there right now, as you can imagine, if we tried to train every Apache pilot that went through Fort Rucker in live UAS systems, it would be impossible. But using simulations, you could easily task saturate somebody with by providing them with multiple UAS simulators or UASs to manage simultaneously. But the capabilities of simulation are pretty significant. If you think about it, if you're a UAS operator, obviously you're not even seeing the device itself. It's almost the same thing if you're flying a simulator, if you're flying the actual device. So we're getting to the point where the technology is about to catch up with us, and I think in FY15 we'll have a new level of simulation capability that we don't really have or aren't fully exploiting right now because it's not fully fielded.
How many different sensors are simulators? In other words, flying Green Eagle or Shadow or something?
Yeah, the UMS is just for either the Gray Eagle or the Shadow. However, we have other simulations like the Muse, which is a desktop simulation system that can link into our constructive simulations. So we could have a real operator or somebody we just trained up to provide that input in a constructive simulation. So, for example, we might have a UAS feed in a tactical operations center, and we could have somebody flying over the gaming or the virtual or constructive base terrain to train a staff with that. But if we leverage Muse, also known as AFSERs in the Air Force, we can replicate numerous UASs flying simultaneously in the battlefield, and then providing a visual signal back to their command posts. If that answers your question.
Yes, sir.
You said that the Kiowa was able to perform such a good job down in Afghanistan because of the adversaries down there. Don't you foresee the same problems with UAS? How do you see UAS operating in a contested environment when we do have radar threats and air threats out there?
Okay. That's a very good question. So we do. And that's, one of the things. So he asked the question, and I made a comment about, the ability of the Kai Warrior to operate in the environment of Iraq and Afghanistan because of the enemy allowing us to get that close. And I wouldn't call it a low-tech enemy, but it was not a near peer. So the question was, as that it pertains to UAS in a contested environment, in the operational environment they expect with electronic warfare, GPS denied, radar, stuff. So how do we, isn't that the UAS have the same threat? And the answer is yes. And so, we are working, and there's a reason why we like to, Tim Baxter and I go plug, and Rich Kretschmeyer for funding up in the Pentagon for RDT&E is, we need to operate in a GPS denied environment. Our ability to do that right now is not good. I would just say we need to get better. In EW environment, yes. And then now you're getting into maybe some aircraft survivability, stuff that I'm not going to talk about, but, between how does a Gray Eagle survive in aircraft survivability and its suite of sensors, or what does it do? So he knew I was getting ready to say something classified, so he interrupted me. That's the NSA right there. That's not really the guy. So it's that's something that we're looking at. Same thing for our helicopters. I mean, that's the same discussion and same things that we need to invest our money and our survivability equipment. But that's a very good question. Yes, sir. All right, the tube launch, that's a concept that I've seen. I would tell you the Army's not currently, that's not in our portfolio. The question about flying from the back of a Black Hawk, that's, I would maybe defer to my PM who knows the material solution, parameters a little better. I don't think right now we currently have the capability. And then you'd be basically adding stuff onto the back of a Black Hawk, equipment and stuff to do that. Because the GC, it's really not that easy. I mean, if you're making it out to be, it's just a radio. I mean, for a small have you seen you see what a universal ground control station looks like? Well, it gets back into the conversation we have. If LOI 4 capability for an Apache, are you just saying would it be for a Black Hawk? I mean, because if you have manned-unmanned teaming and it already exists between a Shadow and a Gray Eagle and Apache, you're advocating to put it on the back of a Black Hawk. So I understand the question correctly. A swarm? Okay. I mean, that's a concept. I wouldn't say that we haven't discounted, but we're not pursuing that.
Attention in the hall. For clarification, tomorrow morning at 0900.
My name is John Arthur. One of my associates back here in the back, Rob Johnson, he and I ran an ACTD called Hunter Standoff Killer Team from a historical perspective. So a lot of things that Tom Drew and Paul Bontrager did downrange, we did in 2004, 5, and 6, where we actually gave level 4 control, and I trained 5 Apache pilots to do level 4 control of a Hunter UAV. Plus, we also had Army Command and Control. It was called A2C2S, where I put a JTAC operator and a FAC-A in the back of the aircraft. Ironically, it was from Jimmy Barkley, then Colonel Barkley, when he commanded 4th ID, and then also Greg Gass, 2004, 5, 6, post 2001 wartime activities. Total different dynamics from what Paul and Colonel Evans and Colonel Drew have been fighting the fight. But we did level 4 control, 8 Hellfire shoots, 55 hours of level 4 control. As a matter of fact, CW5 Mark Riddle was one of the pilots. I had 4 pilots from 21st Cav. So we did that, and we fleshed out a lot of activities. We launched and recover the Hunter UAV on a COA at Brady, Texas, for people who have gone through the Apache training. Very familiar with it. Rob did our technical integration at AATD, and Tony Davila, one of your associates in the PM shop, actually was the guy who helped us, because we were also fighting the fight of taking over the UAS business from the MI contingent as well. So we did that. We fleshed it out, passed that information forward, and that really became the impetus when Rob went into the Apache shop to carry that into what is fielded today with Boeing. But the issues that you're dealing with today, Rich, those things about crew workload, those were huge issues, because I had 2 W3s and 3 W4s and 5s, so that workload was one of the things we walked away with, to be able to recognize that. It can be done, but the interesting thing about the level 4 was the fighter being able to maneuver the UAV into the cone that he needed to launch the Hellfire. That was probably the only thing that really gave the impetus to be able to do that. And that was with buddy launching from one Apache to the other, not even considering launching off the Hellfire. So it's been done, passed forward, and those lessons learned are being built into the .mil PF changes.
In that perspective, I have a question. Why are we still talking about moving the sensor around as if you're the own operator and actually putting down the single waypoints? as an operator, you want to have an effect. I want to see an object from a particular distance and maybe in a particular kind of detail. And let's just figure the system out, you know, where it's going to fly, how it's going to zoom in, and exactly what's it going to do technically. All I want to sort is an effect. So maybe, you know, I'll just tell it go closer or further away, but I don't care how you're going to fly a profile. Is that something you're looking into? Using technology, eventually, you know, sort of.
All right, so I think if you guys didn't hear, the question was just about maybe more along the lines of, I think what you're getting into is talking about TTPs of how best to do it, right? And I think what you bring apart about is a good point that we've always kind of, as we learn, is that don't tell the guy specifically what to look at. Tell him what the task and purpose and the effect that you want. What intelligence? The system. I know, but the system is the function of somebody that believes that they need to use it for a purpose, right? So who controls the system? He can. He can. Right.
Why not just give the system the effect he wants to have, and then let the system itself automatically sort out, you know, the technical details on how to sort out that effect? I mean, everything is you've got the auto hover, small quadcopters, and you don't actually fly them by, you know, manually giving away points. You just tell them go to that point, and I want to see this part of detail. They'll go there and they'll figure everything out.
Right. I'll let Rich answer that. I mean, I think it's a great idea. I just don't have the experience to tell you that. Yeah, I would like to say yes, you're absolutely right, and let's do it. But I don't know if it's that simple. I know autonomy is one of the things that we get less cognitive load on the operator and the pilot. But I mean, what you just described is depending on each situation is extremely complicated. It doesn't describing an effect to a machine to do an effect. And to do it properly, I don't know, is always, you know, the easiest. I'm going through my experiences, and I can't always tell you that in the heat of battle or what you're asking for an effect. It's hard enough to tell your manned platform what I want you to do, and them to do it. Much less, you know, however you would do that, whether through clicks or, I mean, how would you actually send that command to do that? I don't know. But go ahead. You want to?
Just let me build on what Colonel von Eschenbach started out there with. He's absolutely right. We are always pushing the envelope on trying to reduce the cognitive load on the operators. And so we've had several demonstrations, usually in the lab environment, that are similar to what you described, not exactly what you described, but and to some degree we're already doing what you are describing. So the pilots, the operators, they're not really flying the aircraft as Colonel von Eschenbach described. You know, they're putting in waypoints. They're telling it, I want to go over here, I want to look at that. The system figures a lot of that out by itself. We could take it a lot further. The technology is such that it's sometimes difficult to integrate the current state of the art into the systems because of the process by which we do that. It takes a long time to do those kind of things. As these gentlemen mentioned, the .mil PF is catching up to the material solution, so we're always trying to balance how far do we push the material solutions in front of the .mil PF, because you always have that lag, and you got the training, and you've got all those other kind of things that are required for the operators to effectively use the technology. And so I agree with you 100%. The technology's there that we could do much more with collaborative autonomy, with reducing the cognitive load. We're working deliberately toward that. We just haven't got there yet. But we do have plans in our PQDI programs to do those kind of things.
All right, so Lieutenant Colonel Ed Vetter, he's chomping at the bit to come over here and talk. So if you guys don't know who Ed Vetter is, he was the commander of 1-1 attack at Fort Riley that did the, I believe they did their IOT&E and stuff. So they teamed with Greg Eagle, so he's going to come and make a few comments, I think, shed some light on a few things. So thanks, Ed.
I appreciate everyone's comments about the pilot workload. It is very intuitive in the front seat of the Apache to fly a Gray Eagle. Okay, you're not stick and ruddering it. It's much like it said. You drop some waypoints, and after you do that, you can say, hey, can I have level 4 control? Because you just can't take it from the operator. The UAS operator always maintains level 5. Once he gives you that authority, you can send that aircraft down a route. You can select its altitude, its speed, its orbit that you want it in. And not only that, when it hits a checkpoint, you can say, I want you to look at this grid, and the sensor, as it hits that checkpoint, will turn and look at that grid. The whole rest of the time, the pilot is just operating his aircraft and fighting his aircraft. And so it is not as complicated as it may seem. It is a powerful capability to do, and the Vice today talked about it in his opening comments. That was my team that went out and did that mission, where while on the ground we were able to get a live feed from the Gray Eagle, identify the opposing force, launch the aircraft with situational awareness en route, and go and destroy that Op-4. Also, under level 3, we can take control of the UAS laser and use that to shoot our own missiles. Quite powerful, and you also have a go-no-go based on the position of the UAS, so there's no chance of the missile going errant and going after the source of the laser on the UAS. Lots of stuff that was put into this, very, I will say, complex but not complicated for the pilots. Within, I would say, about 8 hours of simulator and about 4 or 5 hours of actual using it in a training environment, all the pilots were very comfortable with it, and there was no pilot workload issue doing that. Plus, as all these great leaders said, the training of the UAS operators is superior, and there was a lot of times that we went out there, and once we identified something, we just let them do the rest of it because they were so well trained at what they did. If there's any, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, it does. And the UAS, the Gray Eagle, has additional sensors and things that the Apache doesn't have, and when you're linked to it, you actually get some of that capability in the cockpit. They have an incredible IR fusion capability that they can rheostat. We were following a car going down the road in infrared. He steps on his brakes, and you see red taillights come through it on the IR image. It's a powerful capability. Sir. I'm not sure that question's for me, sir. The question was, how far away are we from leaving the pilot on the ground? I wouldn't do that. You know, I know we talked about the soda straw kind of effect, but it is really the combination of that manned and unmanned asset that brings that power and capability and flexibility on the battlefield. Sir. I'll have to turn that one over.
It is not in the. It's not in the CONOPS, but that I would just say this. And I mentioned this earlier this morning. Is that, you know, I know this deep dive was to talk about MUM-T and a lot of the future and the capability. But I look at, you know, a guy like John Klein who just fielded the Gray Eagle company, and John Evans who has his company there, and they would probably tell you, you know, we're on the edge of greatness, but we got to get the first steps, you know, there, and we got to prove this capability, you know, and have advocates for it. And really, the budget doesn't allow us to purchase more stuff at this point in time. It is we got what we got, but if we prove in the next 5 years that this capability is additive to the Army, and it's, you know, it's something that shouldn't be afraid of. It's not replacing, you know, manned systems and stuff. Then I think you'll probably get those conversations, because if you have a universal ground control station and that's kind of the center of gravity of your network, adding that is just adding a platform into this, you know, another additive platform, the capability. It'd be like saying, instead of having 24 Apaches, let's make a battalion with 30. You know, and then the ratio really is one of the TTP now is what does the UAS do in its persistence and its time it can stay out there compared to you using your manned platform. But the answer to your question, no. The structure that we are going to get at, and really it's the one that we're planning for the next, is, you know, essentially, well, it's not even 1-to-1. So a shadow platoon is one system, is a platoon has 4 air vehicles, 2 GCSs, and an MGCS. That really interprets to, one continuous string for a 24-hour period for that company. Gray Eagle, it depends on armed or unarmed, what the numbers of orbits that you can support through that. So I wouldn't think a 1-to-1 is really, and I don't know if normally, like when you guys launch, is it you launch one shadow for like a team of 2 normally, sometimes an AWT, more or less. That's kind of the way mission independent. So it's not really even it's 2 manned and 1 unmanned. I mean, that's kind of, Paul, is that kind of what you guys did? Mostly? Okay. All right, but that's a good question. So, and I'm almost off the hot seat. So I don't know, John, did you guys want to comment about training your organizations? Or, a lot of guys don't understand that the 160th has a Gray Eagle company. So it's a little bit different on its employment of how it would do, its mission. But it's a capability that sometimes is often left. Do you want to? I hate to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. I'll make one comment, and we talked about. I think a lot of people talked around it. As we bring in these younger operators, generally not warrant officer flight trained guys, but young soldiers, very, very talented. They're very impressive in their ability to handle the airframes. What we have to continue to do as they're moving to the units, as we work through these POIs, to teach them not just about operating the craft, but understanding all that battlefield geometry of what it is that's around them that creates the environment that they're going to operate in, so they can best support whoever their customer is, whether that's the cab commander who's using them in a MUM-T role, or whether that's a special operations ground force that wants me to do persistent stare and ISR soak to establish pattern of life, and then be able to come up with a solution, kinetic, non-kinetic, whatever the case may be. So that's the one thing I would offer is we've got to help these young guys understand how we do Army aviation, because right now they're just learning to be good pilots.
All right, so we got time for one more question. I know Jeff Kabeman's in the back. He wants to ask me a question. You're my mentor, and you've been talking the whole time I'm up here talking. Yes, sir. Did you mentor Paul Bontrager? That's what you told me.
Where'd he go?
He disappeared.
Oh, crap. It was for him. Did he really go?
He had to leave. Yep. Interoperability with other services. I would say from a perspective of distributing the sensor, having everybody ability to see what everybody else is seeing sensor data, yes. But remember, okay, I went back and said, so, I'll give you the airspace analogy. So as the FAA opens up our civil airspace, one of the things that we're kind of working through is what are the standards? Because the Air Force operates under a remotely piloted vehicle, as they like to refer to it, because they have a rated aviator and we have an operator. So what's the difference? And then is the same standards, is the same training, and so I would tell you probably, taking control of an Air Force aircraft is probably not in the realm of in the vision of what we want to do is interoperability. Sensor data and information, yes. So do you understand the history of the United States Army and the Air Force, right? So I would like to say the Air Force became the Air Force for a reason. They got tired of the Army's crap at one point in time, 1947. But, okay, so see, he's bailing me out. He said, do not say that. All right, I'm done. I'll answer yours on the side, so that way I won't get quoted in somebody's newspaper or whatever. So, thank you very much for your participation.